and welcome to this Lunch and Learn session hosted by Team Consulting. I'm Matt Chandler, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the broader considerations in a device development which could help achieve both regulatory and commercial success. Safety and risk mitigation are the foundation of medical device development. We focus on the safety for the patient and the user and also consider the environment. Regulations and standards help us to achieve that, but perhaps proving a device works isn't good enough. So the documented process of getting there is mandated, and we collect evidence throughout the development. But what should be considered beyond what might be mandated to maximise the potential of success? So the intention of this talk is not to go into the detail of the regulatory process. I'll talk through this more of a development engineer and share some thoughts about the consideration about what we might consider beyond the standards and regulations and what they call for, because we think they have a big bearing on commercial success. I've captured 3 session aims that I'll cover in this talk. Firstly, consideration of the design space in the context of the device complexity and also manufacturing scale, recognizing that understanding this design space can support commercial success and not just the regulatory filing. And then I'd like to explore a few best practices in the design transfer to manufacturing. So how do we go about determining what level of design controls are needed before we think about what else we might want to add in? So, regulations certainly help determine what you need to do, although that is perhaps to a point. There are often areas of interpretation, and things like standards or a company's quality management system will have done a lot of that interpretation. Standards in particular can give us a strong steer for certain devices, such as ventilator or auto-injectors. If we don't do enough, then we risk having our submission rejected. If we do too much, then it might take a lot longer to develop, and we put a huge burden on the resource required to do the development. I think it's helpful to think of the classic V model here, which is a good example of the expectations and requirements at a top level. I think it highlights quite nicely the links and the relationships, particularly at those different levels. And we can also think of some of the documents that sit outside of this simple model, such as capturing high-level project aspirations in a customer requirement or a target product profile document, which is often helpful to align stakeholders, but not necessarily mandated. There's also the risk management documents, which certainly feed into these specifications and support verification. They're important in their own right, of course, helping to guide the level of mitigation required. Device classification certainly simplifies some of the definition of the rigor required. The challenge can then become deciding or determining what classification to follow, particularly as this has a big impact on the evidence and the risk management required for approval. It's not surprising that these device classifications are already based on the risk of device, particularly around say, for example, in class 2 devices relating to the duration that they might be interacting with the body and their complexity. So these can also give us a good steer about what we need to do, and therefore we can think a little bit more about what else we might want to do. So what else should we consider beyond those classifications? Well, some of the risk of harm is already covered by that device classification, but there are still devices that interact directly with the body that are only class 2. So device complexity also part of the consideration of the device classification, but we know that the more complex a device is, that's going to require more testing, particularly around kind of error resolution, thinking about use errors, thinking about software, and any combination of many parts and modules that might have to interact together. We might also think about the manufacturing volumes. Are the devices going to be assembled with a automated system? Can we test them? If an auto injector, we can't test those coming off a production line. So how much can we test, and how do we test something that is like that is a single-use item? How do we make sure things like the processes are stable, taking into account things like the wear of tooling and process control? So these are things that aren't necessarily captured by the device classification or standards, but certainly should be considered when we're developing the products. So I'd like to introduce the design space. So when we're kind of developing a product, it's an iterative process, constantly learning, evolving, converging on the product, and during the process we kind of understand what is necessary to kind of make the device work, make things go together in the way that we intend them to, and that's not just part of the regulations. So we'll be addressing risk, testing, exploring, and a lot of this work is particularly kind of exploring is in the early stages of a development process. We might be kind of trying to understand where the limits are in the device. So here I borrow a quality by design example, typically used in pharma. We can define the control space or a point where we want to be within the design parameters. Outside of that is the design space, where we have some freedom within the design, perhaps to move the control space. That might be the tolerance on a part or the performance, and in this we're still within specification. Understanding the space outside of that design space or the knowledge space helps us understand some of these variables, the impact and their sensitivities, and this is probably where we've gained that knowledge in the development, and it could be really valuable. So I think it's important to capture and report what happens, not just in the space where we're intending to be, but also outside of it. So thinking about that in the context of the development stages and milestones, this is based on our design and development process, and here we've got captured some of the kind of the phase exit reviews through the development process, and at those exit reviews there will be information captured. Some of it would go into a design history file or a technical file, and some will not, but it's still useful, it's still important to capture. So it's worth thinking about how much documentation is required at each step, and to what level and detail, and the rigor behind that. As we move through the development through to the right, that level of rigor and detail becomes greater. But I think it's important earlier on in the stage, even in the kind of the proof of principle, to try and capture useful information that may help understand the device and that knowledge space outside of where perhaps we we intend the device to be. It's also interesting to capture at each stage the intent, the design intent, and what we're setting out to achieve. So early on, that might be captured in that in some of those high-level documents, and then later on we might capture things through considering the features and the functions. Again, it's not necessarily a document that that will need to go into a design history file, but it could be really useful to, for example, to convey some of those key information to a manufacturer. We also might want to consider a platform device if we're trying to develop something that will address a number of different areas. We might have a really well-defined control space, but what if a new application comes along and we need to kind of move away from that design space? That knowledge that we've gained could be really useful in helping us understand how we kind of change the design of a product so that we can move into a new controlled and defined space. When we design transfer and we're kind of conveying information to a manufacturer, we often think about some of the kind of the basic information that is required to manufacture a part. It's obviously important to consider those things such as the drawings, the models, the jigs and assembly fixtures, instructions, things like that. And it's also important to consider and convey the features that we know are critical. This only tells part of the development story. What about all of those other things that we learn along the way? What about, for example, that design intent that I talked about just now? How are those lessons going to help us fix something when it's not working or going together correctly? Often at this stage, the stakeholders, perhaps the manufacturers or the design authority, have a different viewpoint, and so it's really good to ensure that the communication is sound, to make sure that you can avoid potential pitfalls in that design transfer. One of the ways that we suggest that is avoided is to make sure that transfer takes place throughout the development, particularly in the detailed design phase, so that kind of design transfer is not considered a throw over the fence at the end. That is certainly has the potential then to kind of to miss out on some of that key information that might help transfer the design to manufacture efficiently and correctly. So I've got a few examples that hopefully kind of highlight some of the areas where some of that extra knowledge can be helpful. So the first one is an auto injector, particularly around the kind of the release mechanism. In this project, early in the development, it was determined that the material grade of that release mechanism was important. This was understood, it was captured and communicated to the manufacturers. But later on, we also understood the impact of the surface roughness of that particular component. In the development, when the prototypes were being manufactured, the parts were laser cut, and then later on that was transferred to a stamping. And what was understood was that there were tiny burrs and changes to that edge geometry from the stamping process that caused increased friction and contributed to an increased force to actuate. But we'd already kind of learned quite a lot during the development, and particularly around understanding some of the key parameters around force to actuate, and that knowledge was critical to knowing where to investigate and solving that issue pretty quickly. And we were then able to advise and guide the manufacturer to make sure that the stamp parts were fit for purpose. So in this example, whilst it was important to get the critical attributes right, things that are definable, measurable, and achievable within the constraints of cost, quality, and process, it was also really important that we captured the knowledge during the development, and sometimes that knowledge is incidental in terms of those critical attributes, and it's that additional knowledge that helped us keep the development progressing and enabled that transfer to manufacture efficiently, and avoided some of the potential pitfalls when the first devices were made. So manufacturing and testing it's all fine once we're in a steady state. But what happens when things move out of specification, or perhaps even some failures are observed in the field? These can be quite common occurrences, particularly for new products. And when things stop working, it can get really expensive to resolve. It can take quite a lot of time. And particularly that's true when the manufacturing scale has a big impact. So making lots of components and assemblies with automation versus some small batches makes things much harder to rectify any issues once they're being observed. So it's always better to know having learned in the design, what are the levers that might be able to kind of be pulled, rather than late in that stage asking that question of what are the levers that can be pulled. And much of that information is almost certainly captured, or at least should be captured during the development. So there's huge amounts of information and knowledge, and if we capture that in an efficient way, it will be crucial if an issue arises during production, and hopefully that would save a lot of time and ultimately money to resolve. So here's a second example. This time it's a microfluidic cartridge. This consists of a couple of parts that are bonded with an adhesive to create the closed fluidic channels. And in this circumstance, it was a product that we weren't developing, but we were asked to try and help resolve some issues that were being seen early in production. Problems of the cartridge leaking started to occur in one area of the cartridge, and those leaks were seen on increasing numbers of the assemblies. The molder of the parts was pretty clear that the parts were in specification. All the tolerances were being met, and a separate manufacturer was responsible for the bonding process, which was an automated process that, as far as they were concerned, was unchanged. So this time there really wasn't any information and knowledge to fall back on, and that meant that we had to carry out a reasonably lengthy investigation. And what we found was that the flatness of one of the parts in that area where it was leaking wasn't consistent. So could that have been avoided, or could we have resolved the issues quicker if we had a better understanding of that design space, particularly the parameters outside of it? Had anyone captured any leaking issues previously in this assembly? And I guess that question helped us point us to one of the right areas, that some issues had been corrected at some time previously, and the clamping pressure during the adhesive application process had been increased, but they hadn't really investigated the underlying cause. So perhaps if we'd have been able to have addressed some of those underlying causes and the flatness of the part, and understood what really was permissible, rather than trying to correct it with a lot more clamping pressure, those issues might have been avoided, or even when they arose, they could have been addressed more quickly. So it is important to get those critical attributes right, and really to understand the implications of when we kind of move away from the design space. And finally, a third example, still in the world of diagnostics. The previous two examples I gave were more around a change in the manufacturing process that was not capable of achieving the design intent. What really happened was that the design space was being changed. Here I have an example of a design, or at least the development not really understanding the limits or the ranges of a potential manufacturing process. So this was a system development, a diagnostic instrument, cartridge, both in development as well as the assay chemistry. The chemistry and the manufacturing parts both have inherent variability, but really it was that lack of understanding of the manufacturing variability that caused the issues, and particularly the stack up of tolerances that meant that the system struggled during some of the development phases. The assay developers assumed that all the instruments would be exactly the same, and whilst we played some clever engineering to minimise the differences between the assemblies, the system ultimately had to build in some compensation for the variation, and some for the assay too. But it did have quite a significant impact on the manufacturing processes, and finding ways to improve that assembly consistency did put a little bit of additional cost onto the device, which isn't ideal. So I guess the lesson here is that the design space should be considered as a system as a whole. So thinking not just about the device or the physical components, but thinking more broadly about the other stakeholders in the development. And that knowledge gained during the development might have relatively little to do with the regulation, but could really impact in this case, the manufacturability and the cost, and that could have an impact on the commercial viability if those costs are too high. So it's really important to understand in the development how some of those decisions, how some of that the understanding of the design space can also impact the manufacturing and the commercial success. So a quick summary. I think it's generally quite helpful to think of the development of a medical device as two main parts. There's the development of the device itself, and then also thinking about the evidence that is needed to make sure that that device is safe and effective. It's important to capture information and data beyond that evidence, and then that evidence that defines the design space. It's helpful to consider the information that's in that knowledge space, not just what's required for regulatory submission. And that knowledge really can have quite a big impact on the commercial success of the device, be it through the cost of the device or the time it takes to get to market. Thank you.
So Matt, someone has asked, how often do you rely on the manufacturing partners to give heuristic advice regarding DFM and development? For example, upfront giving you the information that burrs may occur or surface roughness will be critical and therefore saving you an iteration loop?
That's a really good question. I think I don't think it's anything that we would want to rely on in terms of kind of the manufacturer. The manufacturers often don't know, exactly which is important, what features are important. I would always encourage that conversation to kind of to happen early on through the design, so that you can kind of convey some of the features and get parts back. Prototype parts back early, so that you can kind of examine them and see kind of what they look like, and maybe you can kind of head off some of those issues early on. But I don't think it's something that you'd want to definitely rely on. But what certainly makes a difference is a good conversation with suppliers. I've certainly had that with manufacturers, where that continual engagement helps uncover things ahead of time.
Excellent. Thanks for that. So another question we've had is someone's asked that what can team offer in terms of guidance for designing a specification in order to comply with regulations?
So here at Team, we specialise in developing medical devices. We were ISO 13485 certified in terms of our quality system, and that provides us the basis to be able to develop devices, but also the documentation such as specifications to support the regulatory standards. I think it's a fairly established process in terms of kind of trying to put together a good specification, making sure that really that you understand what is required and what is sufficient for the device to achieve what it needs to achieve. And then of course looking at the standards, that's the other thing that you need to do, is identify the standards. We use the British Standards Compliance Navigator to help us kind of pull together the standards that we need that are suitable to for a particular kind of device type and classification. And that certainly helps us wade through what can be quite a lengthy process in terms of defining what particular clauses within those standards are pertinent to a particular device and design. So it's more about the kind of the process that we go through, and I think it's the experience we have of kind of dealing with a range of different devices, not just in one particular area, helps us do that quite efficiently.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Matt. So we've just had one more question come in. Someone's asked, are these developmental processes more important for upcoming endpoints or for long-term success of a product?
So I think in terms of what I've spoken about today, it's more thinking about the kind of the longer term view. I think as you go through the kind of the stage gates, particularly through the development process, it is always helpful to see what kind of information and what lessons have been learned that might be useful downstream. So it certainly has an impact going through those stage gates. But I think the real value can be is and maybe you don't ever find out because you've already made use of that good knowledge, but the value can be in getting through into manufacture and ultimately commercialization efficiently without kind of spending a lot of time trying to investigate issues or trying to kind of work out what's going wrong when it might happen.